December 14th, 8:30 a.m. A standard traffic checkpoint on Interstate 40. What seemed like another forgettable morning shift would quietly tear open a door that revealed something nobody was ready to confront. Because what investigators discovered wasn't just one truck carrying contraband. It was an entire ecosystem involving over 300 trucks, more than 60 drivers, and close to 20 warehouse facilities scattered across 11 states. All of them transporting coke, meth, and fentanyl. The further investigators dug, the more urgent one question became. How does an operation this massive move across the entire country without triggering a single alarm? And if a system as large as this can hide in plain sight, how many others are still moving, even as you hear this? Subscribe to this channel for investigations that expose the systems hiding beneath ordinary life. And tell us in the comments where you're watching this from. At 8:30 a.m. that morning, traffic flowed smoothly along Interstate 40 in Oklahoma. Nothing appeared threatening. For the officers conducting roadside inspections that day, it was supposed to be just another routine stop. Just then, a white semi-truck pulled up, displaying the recognizable branding of North Star Freight Group, a logistics company known for moving everyday consumer goods nationwide. Clean compliance records, government shipping contracts, thousands of trucks crossing American highways daily without raising suspicion. The driver remained composed and cooperative. His documentation was complete. His route was authorized. His manifest listed household goods. His total weight fell within legal limits. The kind of stop that officers clear quickly because nothing seems unusual. But when the vehicle rolled across the inspection scale, something seemed to be wrong. The total weight passed inspection, yet the load tilted slightly to one side. When inspectors opened the trailer doors, they found a sealed compartment concealed behind stacked rows of boxed furniture. Inside, 270 kilograms of coke, nearly 600 pounds, an amount substantial enough to devastate entire communities and generate millions of dollars before anyone realized it existed. If this truck appeared normal enough to pass unnoticed, how many others like it were already in motion? And would you have recognized the threat if it had driven past you that morning? After the Interstate 40 seizure, the investigation expanded. Because instead of chasing individual suspects, investigators began extracting GPS records, delivery timetables, and warehouse logs, arranging them side by side like financial statements, searching for what repeated and what didn't. They discovered that the same vehicles traveled identical highways at identical hours, stopping at identical transfer points week after week. That precision immediately told federal agents this wasn't a coincidence. As evidence accumulated, the statistics became impossible to dismiss. Out of 310 drivers employed by the company, 61 were knowingly transporting illegal cargo across state boundaries. 17 warehouse locations spanning 11 states were shipping ordinary retail products by day and processing narcotics by night. The transported coke, meth, and fentanyl, packaged, measured, and documented with the same meticulous care as furniture, appliances, or packaged groceries, integrating so seamlessly into legitimate freight that nothing appeared suspicious on official records. What disturbed investigators most was the centralized control. Every sensitive route, every precisely calculated timing decision, traced back to a central operations command center where no emails referenced drugs, no communications raised red flags, and everything was rationalized through performance metrics and delivery optimization targets. At that moment, the FBI understood they were no longer pursuing conventional criminals. They were examining the operational blueprint of a company that no longer belonged to itself. If a legitimate business can be compromised this quietly, where else could it already be happening? And would anyone notice before irreversible damage occurred? Later on, reports indicated that a substantial fentanyl shipment was preparing to depart from a central distribution facility. Once that shipment left, it would fragment into multiple urban areas within 48 hours. It would end up infiltrating neighborhoods with the same invisibility that ordinary freight always enjoys. Investigators immediately understood the implications. Fentanyl doesn't wait. Every passing hour mattered. The FBI faced a dilemma they had hoped to avoid. Either act immediately and risk compromising the entire long-term investigation, or delay and permit a shipment powerful enough to cause thousands of overdose deaths to proceed unchecked. There was no ideal option. Moving prematurely would send warning signals throughout the network, the kind of alert that makes routes shift, drivers vanish, and documentation disappear overnight. But waiting meant accepting responsibility for the consequences of inaction. The decision was made with full awareness it would transform everything that followed. That night, the operation was executed without media announcements or public statements. Teams mobilized toward 5 warehouse facilities distributed across multiple states, while patrol units positioned themselves along highways where 12 trucks were already traveling routes they had followed so many times. Entry points were breached. Pallets were systematically disassembled. Hidden compartments were exposed, revealing what the official paperwork had carefully disguised. Inside ordinary commercial freight sat stacks of narcotics, packed with industrial precision. By dawn, 18 drivers were in federal custody. Most were intercepted during standard traffic enforcement stops, some at rest facilities, others within minutes of their scheduled delivery points, all apprehended while in motion. The seizure quantities staggered even veteran federal agents. Nearly 6 tons of coke, more than 1.3 tons of meth, and approximately 210 kilograms of fentanyl. Quantities so massive, they stopped registering as drug busts and started feeling like industrial inventory, like measuring shipping containers instead of contraband. On the surface, it appeared to be a breakthrough, and in many ways, it was. One of the largest single-night drug busts connected to commercial trucking that law enforcement had ever documented. But almost immediately, something felt wrong. The expected panic never materialized. There were no frantic communications, no sudden operational shutdowns, no widespread confusion. As federal agents monitored live data surveillance, they watched the remaining network infrastructure adjust in real time. Surviving trucks rerouted. Delivery schedules shifted. Alternative warehouse locations absorbed the operational flow without hesitation. It resembled blocking one lane of highway traffic and realizing the entire transportation grid had already engineered backup routes. The system didn't collapse. It compensated, redistributing cargo loads and timetables as if this disruption had been anticipated all along. That was the moment when apparent victory contracted and actual danger expanded. The FBI understood they had merely touched the perimeter of something far more extensive, something that didn't rely on any individual shipment, driver, or warehouse to maintain operations. What they had interrupted was a grid, and grids are engineered to continue functioning even when components are removed, which meant whoever controlled it was still observing, still authorizing operations, and still directing movement from somewhere far removed from roadblocks and raid locations. The drugs were real. The arrests were real. The disruption was real. But so was the realization that this represented only a surface wound. The operational core remained untouched, and the system was still functioning. Agents later described it as the investigation's most unsettling revelation. The first time they became certain that someone was operating above the drivers, above the warehouses, above the seizures themselves, adjusting operational flow with the calm precision of someone who understood exactly how much pressure the infrastructure could withstand. This was no longer about intercepting trucks after delivery. It was no longer about stopping narcotics one shipment at a time. The architect wasn't on highways and wasn't inside warehouses, but somewhere behind computer screens and scheduling software, monitoring data flows and making decisions that never referenced illegal substances at all. They had removed massive quantities of poison from circulation, but the machine producing it remained operational, and now it knew it was under surveillance. If a system can absorb losses this substantial and continue operating, how extensive does it actually need to be? And how many times has it already adapted without anyone detecting the changes? The investigation's true turning point didn't emerge from a warehouse or highway checkpoint. It came from a desk. Because as intelligence analysts layered months of accumulated data together, every sensitive route, every perfectly synchronized handoff, every profitable operational adjustment. Everything converged at the same location, the office of Ethan Cole, Chief Operating Officer of North Star Freight Group. On official records, Ethan Cole wasn't a criminal. He didn't physically handle drugs. He never discussed narcotics. He never needed to, because his professional responsibilities involved approving transportation schedules, assigning driver rotations, and authorizing shipping routes. Yet behind every shipment that subsequently tested positive for illegal substances, his digital authorization appeared. There were no messages explicitly ordering criminal activity, no communications mentioning coke, meth, or fentanyl, only spreadsheets, performance analytics, and delivery timeframes. But without his approval, no sensitive route was activated. Without his authorization signature, no high-risk cargo departed warehouse facilities, which made his operational role impossible to overlook. Once that connection crystallized, the FBI deliberately slowed their approach. Rushing now would only drive the entire infrastructure underground. So for 18 months, federal agents observed, documented, and waited, collecting GPS tracking data showing how vehicles maneuvered around inspection checkpoints, financial records revealing money flowing through consulting agencies and shell corporations, and corporate documentation explaining how ownership structures and operational control were carefully layered to appear legitimate. What they learned proved deeply troubling. The network wasn't designed to survive one specific route or one particular warehouse. It was engineered to survive disruption itself. With backup scheduling protocols, alternate driver pools, and contingency distribution hubs already established, meaning the only method to end it was eliminating everything simultaneously. So the FBI waited until the system had nowhere remaining to flex. Until routes repeated too predictably, warehouse operations overlapped too obviously, and financial patterns became consistent enough that closing one access point would seal them all. Only then did they prepare the final operation. The operation was called Iron Current because, like an electrical surge cutting power, it was designed to sever all connections at the same time. The timing was calculated with precision down to the minute. At exactly 4:52 a.m., most drivers were either sleeping or already committed to routes they couldn't abandon without triggering internal alarms. At that precise minute, federal teams mobilized across 15 states. They executed search warrants on warehouse facilities, corporate offices, and residential properties simultaneously, ensuring no warning could travel faster than the arrests themselves. Ethan Cole was taken into custody before sunrise, quietly as agents intercepted his normal morning routine before it could begin. Simultaneously, other teams detained senior operations managers, dispatch supervisors, and coordination specialists whose positions had never appeared criminal until the infrastructure around them was fully exposed. At the same moment, the remaining drivers still embedded within the network were intercepted in motion, removed from rest areas, terminal facilities, and highways, extracted from a machine that no longer possessed the structural capacity to function without centralized command. Warehouse locations were systematically searched, pallet by pallet, compartment by compartment, revealing the complete scope of what had been concealed inside ordinary commercial operations. When final inventories were completed, the statistics told a story too substantial to ignore. Federal agents seized approximately 14 tons of coke, more than 3.5 tons of meth, and roughly 500 kilograms of fentanyl. Quantities measured not in packages or containers, but in truckload volumes, along with nearly $52 million in currency. All of it connected to routes that no longer existed. This time, the system didn't adapt, because there were no alternate routes remaining to activate, no backup management personnel authorized to approve operational changes, and no hidden command centers available to quietly redirect cargo flow. The network collapsed inward within hours, like an electrical grid losing its final power station. North Star Freight Group ceased operations. Contracts froze. Trucks sat motionless. Warehouses went dark. This was because the organizational structure holding everything together had been dismantled in one synchronized moment. For investigators, this was the confirmation they had pursued.
The collapse proved that what they had eliminated wasn't a loose association of criminals, but a unified system that couldn't survive without centralized operational control. This represented the investigation's true culmination. Not the seizure quantities, not the arrest statistics, but the recognition that a criminal network operating inside legitimate commerce had finally been exposed and completely shut down. The remaining question wasn't whether the system had been real, but how long it had been permitted to operate in plain sight, and how many others like it might still be moving right now, perfectly scheduled, perfectly documented, and completely invisible. When arrests concluded and warehouse facilities were secured, the highways didn't transform overnight. Trucks still traveled, loading dock lights still illuminated at dawn, scheduling systems still populated computer screens. Yet beneath that familiar motion, something fundamental was absent. North Star Freight Group never recovered. Contracts were terminated. Assets were liquidated. Operations that once moved commercial freight across the country every hour simply stopped, leaving storage yards filled with idle trailers and routes that no longer had anyone authorized to execute them. In subsequent months, federal transportation data indicated that long-distance drug trafficking through commercial trucking declined by nearly 37%. Not because demand vanished, but because one of the largest hidden distribution channels had been removed from the system. Regulatory agencies responded quietly but decisively, strengthening oversight on corporate acquisitions, increasing financial audits inside logistics companies, and treating supply chain infrastructure less like background operations and more like potential vulnerability points. There were no public victory celebrations, no congratulatory speeches, because investigators understood this wasn't a final triumph, but a stark reminder that contemporary criminal operations don't hide in shadowy locations anymore. They hide in spreadsheets, scheduling algorithms, and systems people trust implicitly every single day. The highways still appear normal, but one major artery had been permanently closed. If this could develop inside a company that appeared completely legitimate, where else might it already be occurring? And would anyone recognize the warning signs before substantial damage occurred? What do you find more frightening? Criminals you can visually identify, or systems you never think to question at all? What this investigation leaves behind isn't a sense of complete victory, because dismantling one network doesn't reverse the harm already inflicted, and it doesn't restore the lives affected, while this infrastructure operated quietly in the background, day after day, appearing exactly like normal business operations. If there's one insight to carry forward from this investigation, it's that modern threats don't always announce themselves loudly. The most harmful operations often appear clean, professional, and meticulously managed on the surface. If you think this takedown deserves to be heard, let others know in the comments. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe for more in-depth takedown revelations. See you in the next takedown.